Okay, welcome back for chapter 35, and again we're picking up with more ecology stuff. So this is the biotic components of the ecosystem. Ecosystems are composed of biotic and abiotic components. So the abiotic is, the non-living things, so how much sunlight, inorganic nutrients, soil type, water, temperature, wind, that sort of thing. Biotic components are composed of the various populations of species that form the community. So populations within an ecosystem are categorized according to their food source. So autotrophic organisms, meaning self-feeders, things like plants or cyanobacteria. There are some chemoautotrophic organisms. They reduce CO2 to organic compounds, and they use things like hydrogen sulfide or ammonia as electron acceptors. They tend to do pretty good at hydrothermal vents, but not really anywhere else. Heterotrophs or other feeders, which is basically most things. They need some outside source for organic nutrients, and because they eat things, they're called consumers. So herbivores feed directly on plants or algae, carnivores feed on other animals, and then omnivores feed on both. And the thing about this is it's like a broad generalization for where they get most of it from. Like, pick an animal that's supposed to be a herbivore, and the majority of them eat meat as well, especially like rodents. Rabbits are quite happy to eat each other or any other random bits of meat they can find. Squirrels are evil little things. One of the ways you can tell how long a body's been in the woods is to the degree to which the squirrels have chewed into it, and their teeth leave very distinct marks on the bones. Deer, especially female deer, when they're pregnant, will go through a lot of trouble to find bird nests and eat young birds to get the extra protein in order to make sure that their pregnancy goes properly. I really can't think off the top of my head of a herbivore that never dabbles in consuming little bits of meat, except, some humans. But anyway, so populations there are also decomposers within an ecosystem, and these are things like bacteria and fungus that break down non-living organic matter, and they're also referred to as detritivores because detritus is partially decomposed matter in water and soil. So things like earthworms, beetles, termites, maggots, or fungi, these are detritivores. And you find them everywhere because everything that lives dies. So there's plenty of decaying organic matter around to be used as an energy source. And, it's quite helpful that they're there because otherwise you would be up to your eyeballs in rotting organic filth. So they go a long way towards helping keep things picked up. Energy flow is a concept of how energy cycles through an ecosystem, and it enters from the sun, basically. So photosynthesis is, with few exceptions, like the chemotrophic organisms living at, the thermal vent under the ocean, all the energy that's powering us organic things comes from the sun. And then chemical cycling begins when producers take in organic nutrients from the physical environment. And that just kind of cycles from, there are living and non-living chemical cycles. Like there's like a water cycle and carbon cycle and that sort of thing. So producers make the organic nutrients for themselves and all other organisms in the ecosystem. Consumers, herbivores and omnivores, gain nutrients from eating the producers, and then higher level consumers, carnivores, gain nutrients and energy from eating herbivores and omnivores. Unless you're talking like, bears, in which case they're the omnivore, that's a higher level consumer, but also humans. There's only a limited amount of energy that makes it from one trophic level to the next, which is about 10%, which you'll see right here. So, 10% makes it up from one level to the next. That's why there's only, a fairly limited number of apex predators. It just takes too large of an area for them to have enough energy make it up to their level of the pyramid. You're constantly losing energy. So you're losing heat to the environment. You're losing heat when you do your chemical reactions and metabolism. And, when I'm moving, there's a lot of energy lost to, friction, both within my joints and colliding with the air. So there's just a ton of energy that gets consumed, and you're constantly losing it, which is why so little makes it from one level to the next. In addition to inefficient conversion, because no process can be 100% efficient. It violates the laws of thermodynamics if it was, which is why perpetual motion machines do not exist. There has to be a continuous input of energy to keep something always moving, unless you took it and threw it out in the middle of a true vacuum in space, in which case its inertia will keep it constantly going. But that would have to be a true vacuum, and space is not that. If you chuck something out into the void, there's actually gas out there. It's just so, like our atmosphere, it's just so diffuse that, it's like one particle every kilometer or something in some places, unless you hit a nebula. But things will eventually slow down after colliding with enough random particles. But this isn't a physics class, this is biology, so back on track. So we already talked about the energy flow a bit. So there are, people think of a food chain. You have your leaves, they're eaten by the caterpillars, and the caterpillars are eaten by the hawks, or the tree bird, and the hawks eaten by the tree bird. And then you've got your detritus food chain over here. But the thing is, this is a little simplistic. It's more like how you see on the left of food web, because there's more than just one thing that eats any given thing, and any given thing eats more than one thing. So it's this kind of back and forth interconnected web. So we talked about the pyramid already. Okay, so ecological pyramids, I don't know why they've got that listed twice. It really should just be over here. But anyway, so biomass is the number of organisms at each level multiplied by their weight. And if you're talking just pure biomass, bacteria are the dominant forms of life on this planet, because there's just so many of them. But that aside, the biomass of the autotrophs is greater than that of herbivores, and then the biomass of herbivores is greater than carnivores, because again, 10% each time you go up. So your producer, you can have a lot more producers than your herbivores, and a lot more herbivores than your carnivores, and so on and so forth. So that makes good sense there. Biogeochemical cycles. So this is things like your carbon cycle or your water cycle. You've got a reservoir, which is a source unavailable to producers, such as fossilized remains, rock, deep sea sediments. You've got your exchange pool, from which organisms can take chemicals, such as the atmosphere and the soil. And then your biotic community, where chemicals are moving along in the food chain. And the stuff that's in here may never actually enter the pool, because it's just being passed from organism to organism, or through organism to organism, and so it's just constantly cycling. But if something ends up in the reservoir, it can be there for thousands of years, or hundreds of thousands, or millennia. Classic example of one of these cycles would be like the water cycle. So you've got this aquifer over here in red, if we can zoom in without breaking the computer. Big if some days. So this water's trapped in this aquifer here, and it's just kind of stuck there forever, unless some geological upheaval happens. But you've got water evaporating from the surface of from bodies of water, lake, ocean, whatever, being sent up into the air as vapor, forms clouds, travels, rains, runs back down, that sort of thing. Energy does not cycle in this regard, though. Energy is always converted to heat, basically. Which is why eventually we will run into the heat death of the universe, because heat is not a usable form of energy unless you've got a ton of it together and you use it to like evaporate water and spin a turbine. Uh, but you can't just like concentrate heat. It flows from areas of high concentration to low concentration. It's always dissipating. So eventually all the energy will be converted into disorganized heat energy and will no longer be useful for biological organisms or even like the maintenance of solar systems or things. So at that point, that's the heat death of the universe, and basically time stops existing there too, because time is really just a way of measuring the increase of entropy in a system. So, yeah. But again, not a physics course. We're worried about biology here. So, but the only thing you really need to know other than how the water cycles here is that fresh water is only about 3% of our total water. And eventually water from everywhere returns to the oceans. But then, of course, that evaporates and goes back over and rains. But, every water molecule on this planet has been in the ocean at one point or the other. Phosphorus cycle is a similar kind of thing. You've got phosphorus moves from rocks on land to the ocean, gets trapped in sediment, and the weathering of rocks gradually releases phosphate into the environment and for plants to use. It's a limiting inorganic nutrient for plants, for us too, because you need phosphorus to form ATP because it's adenosine triphosphate. You've got 3 phosphate molecules in there. You need it for your phospholipids, for your cell walls, and for the nucleotides in DNA and RNA. But if you supply excess amounts of a limiting reagent, what usually ends up happening is you'll have a massive overgrowth of one species or another. And in the case of aquatic systems, that leads to algal blooms. And algal blooms are very bad for everything else in that area and for the algae themselves, because they tend to consume all of the available resources and produce a dead zone in the water where everything just dies, whether it's consuming all of the oxygen, or they just create a sheet and prevent sunlight from entering in, or they can produce red tides, which dump neurotoxin into the water because that's what they produce as their defense mechanism. But then when they've just got tons of it, it kills every living thing there. So you don't want to just go and dump. You might think you're helping an ecosystem by giving it the thing it's lacking, but it's perfectly adapted to get the optimal amount out of what is there. There's been an experiment going on in England for 80 years or something like that. It's one of the longest run experiments in history. And they have different plots of land where they just consistently add different fertilizers to it, and they leave a couple as controls where they just don't do anything with them. And you get the highest diversity and biomass out of the plots that were left alone, because everything is adapted to the conditions as they are now. Nitrogen cycle. So the majority of our atmosphere is nitrogen. Breathing pure oxygen is actually very bad for you. It causes lots of oxidative stress, which literally damages you at the cellular level. And it also decreases your respiratory drive, because CO2 buildup is the primary thing that fuels your respiration. Oxygen is a secondary concern because CO2 is far more toxic than oxygen is necessary. But excess oxygen will drive your respiratory rate down, so your O2 stats will be decreased as well, which is why if you have COPD and you're put on, say, 3 liters of oxygen and you're having difficulty catching your breath, you don't open it up to 5 liters of oxygen, because you're not going to get any benefit out of that. If anything, it will be worse for you. So you have nitrogen-fixing bacteria and then ammonifying bacteria. So they're converting bacteria into a usable form for the roots. But you also have bacteria that do the opposite. So they're liberating nitrogen. And it works out to where there's roughly an even exchange between the two. So you have about the same amount of nitrogen in the atmosphere at any given time, and about the same amount of nitrogen that is available for plants to use at any given time, which that's referred to as nitrification and denitrification. And basically just know that's a thing. For carbon cycle, similar to the phosphate cycle, few tweaks here. Photosynthesis takes up carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Cellular respiration returns it to the atmosphere. So far so good. The only kicker is that when you burn fossil fuels, you are releasing carbon dioxide from storage, basically. Because when plants grow, they're literally acquiring their mass from the air. That's what they're taking up the carbon dioxide in photosynthesis for. They need the carbon to grow. And then if they die and their biomass is sequestered underground in the form of, coal or peat or oil or whatever, then that carbon is locked away for however long. But if you dig it up and burn it, you're releasing it back to the atmosphere. And carbon dioxide can or does have a greenhouse effect, so it traps more heat. So you can, if you overburn and dump more carbon into the atmosphere than can be sequestered, then you can lead to an overall warming. Though we have made tremendous strides in the last few decades at limiting how much we're dumping into the atmosphere, at least some countries, the United States among them. Others, not so much, but we're getting there. It's not been that long that we've really been aware that this was a problem either. So all things considered, we're doing a fairly decent job at correcting our impact. Marshes and bogs gradually accumulate carbon and peat and other organic matter because they tend to not decay there, like where the hoot. In the tropics, you get very little carbon accumulating in the soil because of rapid decomposition and high humidity. So that is it for Chapter 35. Questions, comments, concerns, let me know. Again, finals coming up. It's cumulative. Get on that. And I will see you next time.